You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is about a sacrifice made by a boyfriend for success. Now, how does a woman who fought for victims, who was known to be one of the strongest people, become a victim herself? One thing was for certain, with so much support and help, it still wasn't enough. By the way, if you don't know, it's my absolute passion to tell these stories. I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if that's something you would like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a comment down below. I also want to thank our sponsor, Machianna TV. They are a longtime sponsor and they continue to add so many documentaries all the time, and they add on to their already listed thousands of documentaries to watch. Now, one that I watched a few days ago was actually called The 21st Century Killer. It went into 7 different killers who had used the technologies that are, more modern and more advanced to further escalate their crimes. I think it's so interesting seeing that the improvements we're making to our world, or we think that they're improvements, are actually becoming these horrific things that can be used by horrific people. Now, if you don't know, Machianna TV is actually running a holiday special where you can get a buy one get one free gift card for an annual membership. So if you want that holiday special, just go down below. I think that it would be absolutely perfect to get somebody during the holidays. Try.machiannatv.com/Brooke Mckenna or click the link below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2017 in South Africa, and Karabo Mokoena was a 22-year-old living in Johannesburg. She was actually coming from a loving family whom she lived with at the time. This was her mother Lolo and her father Tabang, as well as her sister Montley and her brother Desepo. Now, she was a very religious woman. She also believed in manifestation and wanted everyone around her to live the best lives that they could. Carabao was especially passionate about women's rights, especially because of how awful it was in South Africa. We've covered many cases, and as you guys hopefully know, there's so much injustice in South Africa, especially when it comes to women. And so that's something that Carabo really wanted to become involved in, and she wanted to help. She wanted to make an impact with her voice. And Carabo was a woman who made an impact in every room she was in. And it wasn't just because she was this stunning woman. It was also because she has this strong, feisty personality, and she was very outspoken while still being kind and joyful. When talking to her, you didn't feel overwhelmed by her presence and her passion. You felt comforted and you felt like you could do anything. She was also a well-educated woman. She had gotten a business degree. She was also just always wanting to learn real-world things. And she was also going to start a charity as well for different women. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her sister Montley said that everybody would always want to be around her because of how compassionate and empathetic she was towards others.
Hi guys, I'm Karabo Mokoena, and I just want to share a few of my thoughts on beauty. So, for example, most of us desire to be wives. Most. And he's not exactly marrying my hair or my light skin or my dark skin or my curves. My curves are not going to cook for him, and my hair is definitely not going to assume the roles and the responsibilities of a wife in that home. He still needs to deal with the flaws in my character, unpleasant attitudes and behaviors, or whatever that he may find. So let's work on being. Let's work on becoming successful individuals and finding wholeness and fulfillment in our individuality. The long and short of it, of what I'm trying to say is, while our beauty can open great doors for us, it cannot sustain them. Only the quality of our character can do that for us.
However, by that April 2017, Karabo's family could not get a hold of her. Karabo did live at the time with her family. She shared a room with her sister, so they were all obviously very, very close. They all had each other's backs. No matter what, they shared everything, which is why nobody in her family could believe that they hadn't heard where she was at. On April 30th, her family, who had been trying to report her missing for the last 2 days, finally got through to investigators. Lolo told investigators that she had actually contacted Karabo's ex-boyfriend during that time when investigators weren't listening or doing anything, and she said that she had heard something quite strange. She had just contacted this ex-boyfriend to see if he knew where she was, and he said he had no idea, but he also added that he didn't kill her. Now, this is something that Lolo had never asked and was hoping not to even go in that direction. And they were an on-again, off-again couple, but they were off at that point, and it really seemed that Karabo wanted to be off for good from him. Due to Karabo being a very strong, independent woman, her family hadn't really ever interfered with her relationships. She knew how to handle herself, and she really didn't need them, or that, that's what they thought about the whole thing. That is until a month prior to her disappearance, when they were forced to get involved. This is when Karabo had vanished for the first time. You see, it was March 27th, which was Karabo's 22nd birthday. And again, the family had not heard from her. They had not been able to tell her happy birthday, to sing to her, to give her any cake. And for a woman who was very close to her family, usually she went her entire birthday without speaking to any of them. That is when finally Karabo's sister, Bontley, got a call. When she answered the phone, Karabo was on the other line, but this was not from her usual cell phone. Now that is when Karabo began to say that she was actually in the hospital and she was not around her phone. She couldn't get to her phone, which is why she didn't answer any calls. When Bontley rushed to her sister's side, she found Karabo with bruises all over her body, on her face. Her eyes were bruised, her legs were bruised, and especially her throat, as though something or someone had been around it. She then admitted that her own boyfriend, who was on again at that time, had done this to her and had also smashed her cell phone, which is why she couldn't answer it. After hearing this, her family couldn't believe that they hadn't seen the signs or, gotten a gut feeling about this man and him being more than toxic, him being abusive. They didn't even know he was toxic at this time. They immediately began telling her that it was completely okay to leave him, that she needed to be safe, and that he was abusive. And her mom even said that he was going to kill her. It turned out that the first assault between Karabo and her on-again, off-again boyfriend happened way before this month prior to her disappearance, when she was in the hospital. It started only a few weeks after they had gotten together for the first time. She was actually shoved against a wall when he screamed at her, and shortly after this, she had actually moved out of her parents' home and in with him for a while. Lolo had told Karabo, "You're always welcome to come home," but she thought that Karabo was in this healthy, happy relationship, and so she was more than willing to let her daughter go and be with the love of her life. But what her family didn't know was that many of her friends were starting to get pictures of Karabo with bruises, and she would leave them voice notes telling them what this boyfriend of hers was doing to her. And anytime her friends tried to help her get out of this situation, it seemed as though Karabo was under this spell. She didn't want to hear it. She was pulling away from them anytime they tried to get her away from this abusive man. And Karabo had listened to what they had to say, but ultimately claimed that she loved him way too much to leave him. By the time of her birthday, when she was officially at the hospital due to this, her brother actually began to beg her to report him to the local police for the assault. So this would be on record. And although they knew that the injustice in South Africa was horrible for women, they still wanted to have some sort of record that he had done this to her. And so she actually did decide to go and do this. However, when she got there, they told her that her boyfriend had already filed against her. He had said he was the one who was assaulted by her, even though he had no visible signs of injuries. She moved back in with her family after this. She wanted nothing to do with him. However, a month after that, he was being looked at for her murder. Her abuser's name was Sandil Menso, and he was a man who made her believe that abuse was love. He was brought in for questioning, where he claimed that he had no part in killing Karabo. And this was long before they had a body. Yet there was footage of them together on the day of April 27th in the apartments that Sandil lived in. And this was at Santon Sky, which was a very luxury apartment building. And they walked in from outside. They were going to the elevators to go up to his apartment. And you could just see on Karabo's face, she wasn't happy. She wasn't talking to Sandil. She just kind of looked like she was sad and distant. This also was confusing because, like I said, she had officially broken things off a month ago, and everybody knew this. So they didn't know how he had gotten in contact with her again. The next day, Sandil walked out of the apartment by himself, and then 4 minutes later, he went back to his apartment, and then he came out with a large trash can. Later on, he returned wearing gloves, and he was also holding a trash bag, which looked as though it was full of items, but not as though it was heavy. With all this evidence against him, Sandil did admit that he had disposed of her body. However, he still claimed he had no part in killing Karabo. He said that he had gone out for a business meeting that day, and when he came back, he found that she had committed suicide. He confessed to have panicked and drenched her body in petrol and started a fire. But that is why he had taken the trash can out with her body in it and then cleaned up all the evidence in the room. He said that no one would have believed him if he would have called the police. Her family already thought that he was evil, and this was said to be his first story. However, it was not his last. See, Sandil was a forex trader, and he was said to have an ex-wife and 3 children whom he had abandoned. And he was said to have a graphic design degree, but he was making a significant amount of money due to this trading and teaching others how to trade. He started a business doing just that, and these classes were like $6,000 for 1 hour of learning this. He had expensive clothes, cars, and an apartment building, and just as Carabo, he was said to believe in the power of the mind and the ability to get whatever you want in life. And so when Carabo met him, she thought that it was a match made in heaven. Yet when it came to Carabo's teachings, she was genuine, helpful, honest, and never charging money. In fact, she was wanting to give rather than take to help victims, but it was the opposite for Sandil. Well, he had a very charming nature to himself, but behind all that was his ability to manipulate, and due to that, it appeared one and the same. When they met while partying, she was so happy that they had this connection unlike anything other, and he also loved God as much as her. Yet this turned out to be all an act, and eventually, thankfully, her family was able to get Karabo away from him. Or so they thought. It turned out that 2 weeks prior to her disappearance, she had gone out partying with friends, and that is when she actually called her mother and said that Sandil was at the bar. This was, of course, a local bar, so it wasn't strange she was there, but she just could not handle this. And Lolo had told her, do not talk to him, just come home, baby, come home, don't interact. And unfortunately, before she could do so, Sandil had her in his grasp once again. They began seeing each other once again, which no one really knew about. And at this point, Sandil was doing things like flirting with other women, not even apologizing for what he had done before. And the toxic and abusive treatment just escalated from there. And then on April 26th, 4 days before the disappearance, she had stayed the night at his place. Her mother had actually called on her to check on her that night to see, where she was. And she answered in a whisper saying that she couldn't talk. She said she would call her mother the next morning, but she never did. That April 27th, Karabo was meant to be going to another party. And so she actually took Sandil with her, and witnesses at the party said that they left early due to a fight. When Lolo finally got Karabo reported missing, Lolo actually took investigators to Sandil's apartment and said that they needed to talk to him. However, he said that she had left his apartment long before and went to London. And that's when they arrested him, knowing that this could not be true. You see, Karabo's sister Bontley had gone to these apartments during the time that she went missing, and her being reported to investigators as missing, or them actually acknowledging that she was missing, and she went to this apartment to get information herself. That is when she watched the footage of her sister going into the apartment and then never coming back. And that is also when a security guard came up to her with her sister's passport and identity document that he had found in one of the trash cans. Without these things, Karabo couldn't have been to London. She couldn't have gone anywhere. While Sandil was in custody, his family actually wrote a letter to Karabo's family and slid it under the door. It turned out that this was a letter of apologies, but Sandil's family hadn't waited for her family to return to hand deliver it to him. They just slid it under the door. And of course, Karabo's family thought that this was very disrespectful. I mean, they could have just not sent a letter instead of, not hand delivering it. And so the next one, the Sandil's family actually did deliver it by hand, and they actually refused to take it. Sandil's family had tried to say that they knew how serious gender-based violence was and how they sympathized with their loss. But they were also saying that Karabo was like their own and they loved her too. Sandil then agreed to take investigators to where he had left Karabo's body. He took them to a ditch where they found that there was evidence of a fire, but no body was there. He said that he had burnt her body there with a tire around her neck. Investigators searched this area for her remains, but were not finding anything. And that was because she was actually in a completely different area in a deserted field under a shallow grave, already deceased. She was thought to be a burning mannequin by witnesses, and investigators in another town were sent out there to find her. She was burnt beyond recognition. They had no idea how they were going to figure out her identity. And this was a day before the investigation into her disappearance actually began, where she disappeared. 10 days later, her identity was officially confirmed that she was this body in the field. And Karabo's mother, Lola, was of course distraught, but she had been trying to make investigators listen for those 2 days prior, and now her daughter was dead, and she felt like she could have done better, like she had a hole in her heart. She begged to see the remains, and investigators were telling her, it's bad, you don't want to see it, and she said she needed to see it for herself. And that is when she was brought in to see, and it was actually just on the screen, and the only thing she was allowed to see, because it was the only thing left, was Karabo's legs and her red nail polish. It turned out that investigators had botched several things when it came to Karabo and her safety, because when she had officially gotten out of the hospital and she went to investigators, she was reporting the assault that had occurred, and then she found out that Sandil had already reported against her. The officer told her not to even report, that it would be this back and forth thing that they didn't have time to deal with, and to not even worry about it. So she left without her pain being acknowledged or heard, and her abuser rewriting the truth. Could this have been stopped if investigators had just listened to her the first time? After her body was found, investigators then began looking for witnesses. They went to 3 different provinces, and they found 50 different people to talk to. They also went back to Sandil's apartment and found different evidence. They wanted to make sure they had it all. Bloodstains were then located in the apartment. And of course, they had the evidence of the footage where she never left the apartment. But along with piecing together this crime, investigators were also dealing with calming the public, because they were in an uproar about this case. Sandil had admitted to dumping the body and was said to be very calm and cooperative, but the police captain said he wasn't necessarily a psychopath. There was just something very wrong with him. The public were saying that he was this worthless man. They began using the hashtag men are trash on social media, and they even got Sandil and Karabo's names trending. Sandil was then wanting to come forward to say that he was beaten while in jail by a prison guard, and when this came to light, basically nothing was done about it, and he was upset about this. Yet he was also saying that different officers on this case were basically bribing him, saying that they could get rid of all the charges for a large sum of money because he was said to be rich, but none of this was proven to be true. or false. During the trial, Sandil began saying that Karabo was actually abused by her father and not him. And immediately after hearing this, Karabo's brother Tisepo was absolutely enraged. He said that their dad would have never harmed his daughter in any way, and everyone knew that Tabang, her father, was this bubbly, loving father who was a kind man with lots of humor. The whole family was finding this trial extremely difficult, not only dealing with the murder of their daughter, but also the fact that they were being torn apart, that Sandil was putting it all on them. Sandil was still pleading not guilty to the murder charge, as well as assault and attempt to cause grievous bodily harm, as well as obstructing the ends of justice by burning her body. But that's when it was finally revealed just how horrific the condition Karabo's body was found in, because before it was just that it was burnt, which was horrific enough, but it turned out to be even worse. You see, she had been found by the lead investigator to have 60% of her internal organs missing, her heart being one of them. Her skull and part of her rib cage were all that remained of the upper part of her body. They hadn't just been burnt to ash, because there was no ash in those places. They had been taken. These organs were gone, and that led many to believe that this was a death due to a ritual. When this left the courtroom and the public knew about it, that is when witnesses began to speak up about Sandil wanting to take Karabo somewhere to do some kind of ritual when she was still alive. Now, this was when they were officially dating, way before the abuse began, which wasn't very long into the relationship, so probably like the first few weeks. And that is when they allegedly went to cut themselves and mix their blood. This wasn't the whole ritual, because allegedly it had to contain another element. You see, they had to stay as one, stay in a relationship, or else a sacrifice would be needed. Another witness corroborated this entire story, and the prosecution actually wanted to have this case go to trial for the ritual murder allegations, but this wasn't accepted by the court, and so that's when domestic abuse was deemed the motive for this trial, so they could actually get a conviction. You see, Sandil, while he was in jail, he kind of would just talk. And he was heard telling an officer that Karabo had stabbed herself as part of this ritual, and that's when he had to get rid of her body. He said that when they were dating, they went to this person called Master, who did perform this ritual that connected them spiritually, and this was to make his foreign exchange business much stronger, much more successful. He said that in business you need power, and this ritual would bring them power. It was meant to have specials, like superpowers, that would help the couple rise to success and make millions. He even said that they allegedly got matching cross tattoos for this whole thing, and Sandil's business actually did begin to prosper when they were together, and then he said it started going downhill when Karabo left him after being in the hospital. He said that after she had taken her life, he then took her blood, mixed it with his, and then was going to take that blood to the Master to perform a separation ritual so he could still be successful even though she was gone. However, even though an officer testified to hearing him say this during the trial, Sandil fully declined talking about this. He said that it was not something he would ever say, that a ritual didn't occur. But then Sandil took the stand, and he went on about the fact that he was this important man that Karabo needed in her life, that he was a positive influence, that she was abusive and unstable, and he was just trying to be good for her. He said that Karabo was this money-hungry, troubled soul who had been sexually assaulted by a friend, haunted by miscarriage, and this is what led her to suicide. He said the only thing he was guilty of was being someone in her life at that time.
I tried to be a positive influence in her life, but it's unfortunate that I came into her life at a point where things were already bad. So yeah, maybe I'm guilty of trying to build a person and being the last one there when she collapsed, So the truth of the matter is I tried my best.
He also said that Karabo's family knew that he was good for her. And that is when Karabo's sister Bontley testified. And she said that Sandil showed no sympathy for the pain that he caused their family and that he was never remorseful. She was saying that he was like a psychopath, but she didn't know how to describe it because it was that evil. She was saying how much of a hypocrite he was, that he was saying he was such a good person, but then he also killed her. It was also found at this time that this man, who was said to be this important rich man with a successful business, was actually in a huge amount of debt. He spent almost all of his money on material things that he could show off to different people to prove to them that he was successful. Yet he was really drowning in the debt, and many of his clients began coming forward saying that his business was a scam and they had lost thousands to him. The prosecutor said that Sandil does not value women, and that led him to not value life or the life of a person. He believed that Sandil was heartless, arrogant, and remorseless, and he had never encountered someone like him. Judge Pete Johnson called Sandil the devil in disguise, who believed money would help him escape punishment. The judge believed he was a danger to society and he deserved nothing less than harsh punishment, and sentenced him to 32 years. The entire time, Sandil's family sat in the courtroom emotionless. They weren't there the whole trial, but when they did, they came for sentencing and they didn't say much. The investigators said that they believed that he wouldn't have been found guilty if Carabo hadn't gone to the hospital, because there would have been no proof of abuse prior. But his defense attorney was baffled by this sentence, saying that he couldn't believe that he got more than 15 years, that he could see this kind of sentence for someone who had robbed a bank with guns, but not for someone who was dealing with a love affair. Those are the words that he chose to use when it came to a murder. They wanted to appeal, but Sandil finally admitted he did not have enough money to do so. A year later, Bontley still slept in the same room that her sister had once slept in with her, with that same twin bed just empty next to her, and she said that she had started suffering from severe trust issues, which made it all the more difficult for her to actually meet someone and be in a relationship herself. She said that the funeral really opened her eyes to the harshness of the world, and her family doesn't celebrate the anniversary of her death because they'd rather celebrate her life. Bontley says that she can't forgive Sandil because she can't forgive someone who just doesn't care. She says that Carabo and her were like two peas in a pod. They told each other everything. They were each other's other half. And Carabo was always this outgoing one, where she was always the home buddy. So they made the perfect balance of each other. And that is why she ultimately decided with two of Carabo's friends, who are named Stephanie and Michelle, to start the foundation that Carabo had always talked about. It's called the Karabo Mokoena Foundation, to build a generation of substance and help support women and children.
Basically, we just took from the footsteps that she had already left us with, and a lot of people were saying that maybe her story was famous because she was beautiful, but that's not the case. Carabo was a woman of substance, and she was already working with a couple of foundations, including the Orphanage House Group and the Frida Hartley Shelter, who have been our partners. We actually launched with them this Saturday at the Da Vinci. And we managed to put together some sponsors, including Cyfleet and Leatherleaf, who managed to donate a car to the Orphanage House Group, which is the foundation that she used to work with, as well as provide training and employment for every woman at the Frida Hartley Shelter. So we just partnered with what she had already left us with, and we're carrying that forward.
Yeah. What is the name of the foundation?
The
Karabo Mokoena Foundation.
Okay. I assumed it was called that because obviously you want to honor her. And
the irony is she actually wrote it in her diary. She said, one day I'm going to have a foundation and this is the name that it's going to have. So we're so blessed, to be honest with you. The irony that such a terrible situation could be turned around and in the end help many women going forward to just get out of those destructive situations.
Carabo's friend Michelle said Carabo connected with people's hearts. She had so much to offer. I often told her she had the complete package, beauty inside and out. She had so much compassion for others, so many dreams. She was an inspiration and the light of her family. She and many other of Carabo's friends and family feel guilty for not doing more to get her out of this situation, this toxic relationship, and this abuser. But they ultimately chose to just support Carabo instead of losing her because they thought that that would have been worse for her to not have anybody by her side. After her murder, though, one of Carabo's friends did end up leaving her own abusive boyfriend, saying what could occur, and that is what was so important about this case that I wanted to tell you, is that small change right there can create a ripple effect of so many more women and men who are in abusive relationships and non-binary who deserve to get out. Karabo's brother Tsepo says that he has been angry ever since, and he doesn't know what to do with all that anger. Now let me make this clear. There was plenty of rumors about this supernatural ritual and the powers that led to her murder, but the truth of the matter is, even if there was a ritual, even if it did have to do with this on Sendil's end, it is much more simple than that. It is another case of an abusive relationship ending in murder. It's as simple as that. At the core, the abuser hid behind this insane motive to cover up the fact that he was a horrific man who killed a woman, a narcissist who just took this strong, independent woman and broke her spirit. I read an article that the Minister of Women called Karabo weak for this all happening to her and that she wasn't actually strong. And I don't believe that's true at all. You guys know that I believe that victims are always the stronger one and that the killers, the monsters, are the weak ones. But I do have something to say about that, because I think that everybody looked at Karabo as this strong woman, so strong that maybe she didn't need help. And yes, they helped her in the end and they tried their best, and I'm not blaming any of them. But the fact of the matter is, due to the fact that she appeared so independent, at first nobody thought she needed protecting. They didn't think that they needed to watch out for her. They didn't think she could ever be in this situation. And the truth of the matter is, everybody can be. Everybody can fall victim to these people. And you can't look at a strong person and say they don't need help. They're fine. Because they may need just as much help as you. Please look out for all of your super strong women, men, and non-binary people. And look out for the people who appear as though they don't need you. And make sure that there's not a part of them that maybe does. Narcissists, manipulators, monsters are so good at making you believe that maybe it's you that has the red flags. Maybe it's you that is the problem and not them. And so people who are normally these confident, strong people who don't let anything get to them are broken down piece by piece until they are completely a different version of themselves that they never thought that they could be. Because these kind of people, they latch on to the people that they wish they could be. And then they break them. I never want to talk about the harsh realities of the world, even though this is what I do and I talk about murder. But I think that, talking about the psychological effects of all of this, and I never want it to seem hopeless. I never want the world to seem hopeless. I just want you guys to be prepared. And I just want you to know that it happens. And it shouldn't. But it does. And I want you to be ready for that. And I don't want it to happen to you, but I want you to have that one more ounce of, I would get through that situation, So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough. And I love you to absolute pieces.